Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to be your host for a session of good times, storytelling, and celebration as we say cheers to 50 years at this, our 50th annual meeting. So it's been a long time in coming, and it does feel slightly anticlimactic to be doing this remotely, but this is as close as we can be without breathing on each other and causing a super spreader. So that's a good thing. Be sure to fill a glass with your beverage of choice as we take a stroll down memory lane. While I know we all wish we could gather in person, it's still great to see so many familiar faces on this screen tonight. In just a bit, we're going to give the floor over to some folks who have some great stories to tell about the humor, creativity, and tenacity that has defined our work over the past half century. And by the way, I saw Nick Golder, who is here in the building with us. For many of you know Nick, and it's a great honor to have him here. I'm not sure he can get on camera, but Ellen Pfister brought him. And if we could get him to tell stories, he would have many to tell. So anyway, just wanted to let people know that. But before we get started, I've got my own story to tell. This story is a little darker than those you're likely to hear from the other speakers tonight. In fact, this story is downright terrifying, a horror story, really. Honestly, I'm a little uncomfortable telling this tale because it's downright gross, ghastly, and gruesome. We had to save this one for the evening hours because it may be disturbing for younger viewers. It sends shivers down my spine just to consider it, but this tale of horror, decay, and unmerciful suffering portrays the unthinkable, the unimaginable, the outright abject horror of what Montana would look like were it not for you, Northern Plains members, protecting this state from the corrosive corruption of corporate greed and environmental devastation. The scene is 1971. The North Central Power Study, a plan hatched through collaborations with major energy companies and the federal government, was set into motion. 42 coal-fired power plants were coming to the region, with half of them spanning from Colstrip to Gillette, Wyoming. In this dark alternative history, there are no courageous ranch families. No Aldersons, McRaes, Tullys, Charters, Pfisters, Golders, or Wallers to stand up and organize their neighbors to protect this land. Instead, the region is controlled by landowners and corporations that only believe in greed. So, Eastern Montana does indeed become a sacrifice zone without Northern Plains, with strip mines carving up ranch and farmland, power plants belching black clouds, and coal cars and power lines disrupting any remaining private property and pastoral landscapes that the mines had spared. So that's the big picture. Without Northern Plains, without you, Montana becomes a desecrated land where nothing is sacred should it interfere with the corporate balance sheet. While the big picture is painful to ponder, the specifics are even worse. Without Northern Plains members doing the hard work of learning the issues and doing the research, you know, the work that our state agencies are supposed to do for us, a series of crises cascade throughout the state, harming our water, air, and climate, as well as our farms, ranches, cities, towns, and rural communities. Here are just a few of the tragedies Montana would suffer without Northern Plains here to protect us. We'll also see some of the pathetic attempts by industry insiders and politicians to put a positive spin on these horrible catastrophes. We have no surface owner consent laws, so landowners are forced to allow corporations to destroy their land and livelihoods with bulldozers and bullying. Out-of-state garbage would have become Montana's new way of gaining ground. Politicians and planners began piling up the garbage in heaps with the goal of building a whole new mountain range for outdoor recreation in Eastern Montana. You have to hand it to the Southeast Economic Development Association for creativity, don't you? No strip mining laws are ever passed, and land is never reclaimed once the earth is torn apart, leaving huge swaths of our landscape scarred and barren. Of course, the industrialists try to rebrand this as natural reclamation. Mother Nature takes time, like thousands of years. The mighty Yellowstone River runs dry because it's been drained by industrial use and abuse. Family farms and ranches completely vanished from rural Montana, leaving us with only corporate operations and billionaire playground ranches. Wildlife and livestock are erased from our landscapes, unable to survive without enough clean water, healthy plants, and unspoiled land. The Tongue River is built, bringing with it collisions with prized cattle. A beautiful valley of pristine working landscapes become an industrial hub for the coal industry. Coal bed methane wells dominate eastern Montana's landscape, draining aquifers and salinating what little water remains. The state of Montana embraces the prison industrial complex economic model to generate revenue by putting prisoners to work in new coal bed methane salt mines. We don't have a good neighbor agreement, and as a result, the Boulder and Stillwater rivers are polluted, full of algae and devoid of fish. Massive manly man camps would destroy the serenity of our river valleys, bringing with them unruly behavior by bored transient workers. Billings has the worst air pollution in the nation, with a haze of gray toxic smog hovering throughout the Yellowstone Valley. Makoshika State Park is overtaken by oil and gas development, with oil wells dominating the natural rock formations. Makoshika is rebranded as Petroleum Park. Yellowstone National Park has a gold mine above it, destroying the local hydrology and erasing much of the wildlife. The industrialists take control of the park's image, repurposing it as a retail location for gold jewelry and developing a new mascot in the form of a gold bedazzled grizzly bear named Bling. The Keystone XL pipeline is built, stealing land from property owners along its route through eminent domain. Eventually, thousands of barrels of toxic tar sands spill into the Missouri River, destroying the municipal water supply at Fort Peck and the northeast corner of the state. But TC Energy executives try to reframe the story by promoting tar sands tea, a mineral-enhanced drinking water straight from your tap. Northwestern Energy charges customers double the standard rate for having solar panels on their homes and businesses. They also successfully lobby the state legislature to completely ban wind and solar energy from public utility portfolios. And last of all, our state legislators are wholly and completely captured by the industry, happily serving as lapdogs to corporate interests. Oh, wait, actually, that did happen. So there you have it. Pretty scary stuff, huh? Instead of being the last best place, Montana would be the first place hellscape without Northern Plains Resource Council. Thankfully, this gruesome tale is one of dark fiction, a made-up ghost story to remind us what our fate might have been without the power of grassroots democracy and community organizing. The real story is one where Montanans have a constitutional right to a clean and healthful environment, where we have a say in the decisions that affect our communities, where we band together and raise hell if anyone tries to pollute our pristine rivers, spoil our working landscapes, foul our clean air, threaten our farm and ranch lands, disregard and disrespect tribal communities and treaty rights, corrupt our cities and towns with corporate-friendly ordinances, or take away any of our democratic rights. Because of Northern Plains members like you, and because of all the members and leaders that came before us over the last 5 decades, the true story of Montana is one of vibrant, thriving communities, strong environmental protections, and a beautiful protected state that we are continuing to steward and preserve for our children and grandchildren. So once again, let's raise a glass and say cheers to 50 years of Northern Plains members being the heroes of Montana's true story over the past half century. Okay, it's weird because I hope you were all laughing and I can't hear anybody laugh except myself.
That was great.
Okay, now it's time to dig into the real history of Northern Plains. We have a group of members who are going to tell some stories about our campaigns and our members over the years. We could talk for hours and hours about these stories, and I could talk for an hour about each one of these members, but I want to save time for their stories, so I'm going to keep the introductions brief. Our first storyteller was here from the very beginning. She is from one of the founding families of Northern Plains. Ellen Pfister is a former Bull Mountain rancher who has been a force of nature in helping defend Montana against harmful coal mining practices, not just in the Bulls, but all over the state and Western region. Ellen, thanks so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Am I on? Okay. It's good to talk with you tonight. The more things change, the more they stay the same. In 1970 and 71, Consolidation Coal was in the process of dismantling the Bull Mountain neighborhood adjacent to my mother and I. Coal was in the news everywhere in Montana and Wyoming, thanks to the North Central Power Study and the Montana and Wyoming Aqueduct Study. Folks in the Bull Mountain Landowners Association had been in touch with the ranchers on the Rosebud down at Coal Strip, and it was decided to form an umbrella organization. An organizational meeting was held in the spring of 1971. Wilbur Wood remembers giving in the first membership check. In August 1972, Ann Charter and I put out the first newsletter. I typed it on a very old typewriter. In 1972, Ann Charter, Vera Beth Johnson, Don Golder, and I went to DC to testify at a meeting, an oversight meeting in the House of Representatives by Representative Ken Heckler of West Virginia to ban strip mining for at least a while. When we left the hearing, Louise Dunlap of the Environmental Policy Center in DC pounced on the four of us. We were the piece she was looking for to turn the Eastern unhappiness in their coal fields into a national movement. And just to remind you, in that year, 129 people were killed in Buffalo Creek, West Virginia, when a coal slurry pond broke. From then on, we were intent on getting some form of a national reclamation law passed. It took until August 1977 to accomplish that, but in the meantime, we got a reclamation law through the Montana legislature in 1973. It was kind of amateurish, but it was a start. We got the federal law passed 3 times in the 1970s, only to have Nixon and Ford each veto it until Carter finally signed it. Carter got a lot of criticism, but I will always be grateful to him for his signature on that bill. I think there was a trade-off that coal could be mined, but only if there was reclamation after mining. Now, 50 years later, we are starting to see if the companies have lived up to their bargain, and a great many of them have only lived up to it indifferently. In the Bulls, the current company that is mining is starting what I believe to be a second attempt at emptying the neighborhood of its residents. And I believe that they plan to destroy the water in the heart of the Bulls, leaving an empty and desiccated area. A second trip to DC after the 1972 election got us a meeting with US Senator John Melcher. Ann Charter, Irv and Carolyn Alderson, and myself met with him. He was engaged in blowing us off until Irv mentioned that Dick Kohlberg had gotten elected to the Montana House on an anti-strip mining platform. It was like putting money in a slot machine and seeing it all come up cherries. We had his attention. Everything was fluid and none of us knew what would be next. I was elected chair in October 1972, complete with a volunteer staff. I spent a lot of time that winter lobbying in Helena, so much so that I was mistaken for a lobbyist. I had no idea that our organization would last for 50 years and that coal would still be one of the centerpieces of our work. We need to see that reclamation is properly completed as far as humanly possible. And the best thing on the horizon is solar and wind, because even though they take surface use, they do not affect the underground aquifers. And without that underground water, we in Eastern Montana are simply non-existent. Thank you.
Okay, the host was not allowing me to unmute myself, but now I'm unmuted. Thank you, Ellen. Our next guest is Seth Newton, who ranches just outside Glendive. Seth has been a leader in Dawson Resource Council and was one of our hardest working members in helping us get Montana's first ever radioactive oil waste disposal rules in place last year. Take it away, Seth.
Okay. Thanks, Teresa, and thanks for everyone for the chance to speak here tonight. Back in 2012, during the Bakken oil boom, there was talk in my area of an oil waste facility trying to be built. At the time, no one knew of radioactivity radioactivity limits regarding oil waste disposal, and that this would be the catalyst for this to take place here in Montana and in such a big way. The facility was given a permit in essence in the dead of night with minuscule public notice, no local public meetings. And looking back, if we had only a clue on how large of a scale this project was going to be once it got going. For the first 3 to 4 years, we commonly observed waste falling off overloaded trucks while they turned corners at intersections and various places along the transportation route. The trucks were not required to be tarped, so practically none were. While driving the tractor on the road, I could see into the loads and how very liquid many of the loads were. When some of these loads spilled on the roadway, they permanently stained the highway for years until finally the roadway was resurfaced. Some of this waste was of a clear appearance and some of a gray appearance. The spill sites would reek of a chemical diesel fuel smell. We knew that the material was dangerous and that 90% of it was coming from out of state. We knew where the waste facility was sited, and we knew it threatened ground and surface water. With so much going on and such a threat to the future, I decided to do something. Early on, there was many local do-it-yourself type of efforts made by many local individuals trying to work with DEQ or local authorities, but no one was getting anywhere or even coming close to getting taken seriously. I continued to reach out to people I knew and trusted in hopes of finding help and answers. Someone told me of Northern Plains Resource Council and how they had experience working with Northern Plains on pipeline easements. I started attending the local Northern Plains affiliate, Dawson Resource Council, and working with individuals at the meetings, trying to figure out some type of handle for this problem. After researching, we began to see that the rules were arbitrary and governed under a loose set of guidelines that were the same as a run-of-the-mill municipal waste site. We decided to pursue specific rules for oil waste, such as other states have done. This was a long and difficult undertaking. It took over 6 years. In that time, we produced well-researched technical recommendations to DEQ. We weighed in heavily on the very lacking 2017 rules draft that was later scrapped. We participated in a rulemaking roundtable that was stacked, filled full of industry. Once again, weighed in heavily on the 2019 rules draft. At each of these significant junctures, we faced nightmarish scenarios that industry and DEQ were proposing for our state to live with. Through the grace of this organization, we were able to face these things and fight for something that was just and fair. Finally, in January of 2020, we were informed that 5 of the most significant and meaningful conditions had been met. and they were going to be incorporated into the final rules draft. We were cautiously optimistic and really felt good about all of the work we had put in. But then, once again, we were blindsided. The petroleum industry pulled out one last stop to try and block the rules from being finalized. They drug in a legislative committee into the process during a non-legislative year. Once again, we organized our tails off. And in only a month's time, we flipped a committee who originally opposed our stance from a vote of 6-10 to seeing it our way, 14-2. This was far and away some of the greatest work I've ever seen accomplished. This was truly a David versus Goliath type of story. Sadly, the far eastern part of the state, we were out of state, not out of sight and out of mind, with waste from out of state coming in sometimes. And it's just difficult for our state officials to get them to take us seriously. But it's only because of being a Northern Plains member and the work of organizing together that we were able to build strong protections for the entire state. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Seth. Our next speaker is Joan Kresich. Joan lives in Livingston and has been a tireless leader for the Yellowstone Bend Citizens Council, which she helped found. Joni has helped coordinate numerous solar projects in Livingston, both for residential homeowners as well as local businesses and organizations. Joan also worked to stop coal export terminals on the West Coast that would have hauled millions of tons of Montana coal through Livingston, in addition to so many other cities. The floor is yours, Joni.
Thank you, Teresa. So nice to be here with all of you. Before moving from the big, huge, gigantic urban Bay Area in 2006, my husband and I often had conversations about how much fun it was going to be to join progressive efforts in a small town to make life better for everyone. And that it would be so much more possible to make a big impact. So when I arrived here in Livingston, I found a few other women, and we did get working right away on some really great projects. But after each event, a film showing, a big community gathering, the next day it would feel that we were back to zero. We were not growing, we were not building. We were in a car, but it was like we were stuck in neutral. Just when I hit a really low point, feeling really discouraged, Northern Plains sent organizer Paige Atchison, who arrived in town to help us organize with the Power Past Coal campaign. Right away, I saw how Northern Plains was an organization with a plan, an organization with a purpose, an organization with a spine. We here in Livingston were proud to help defeat more coal export facilities on the West Coast. We were protecting ourselves from huge increases in coal dust and noise. We were helping people all along the rail route, and we were certainly helping those export communities. One day, in a real fun flurry of brainstorming, Paige and I decided to set up a coal train count. That's because pretty much everybody involved in the campaign felt that the figures about how many coal car trains were coming through our towns were not accurate. We all suspected that the published figures were just too low. A local member invited us to count coal cars on her Bozeman Pass property. And we were feeling, I guess, our power. And we didn't count for 6 hours or 12 hours. We counted for 36 hours straight, night and day. Our friend had a teepee. People in the night slept there. I will say that our data was not exactly scientific, but it did tell us clearly that there were more trains traveling the rails than reported, more coal trains. Now, my shift was from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. and it did yield written data, but in the morning, it took quite a bit of interpreting. Shortly after our foray into the business of coal car counting, Northern Plains supported us here in Livingston to form our own affiliate. The process was so exhilarating and so empowering. In the 7.5 years since, we've accomplished so much. We're not only in a moving vehicle, we're the drivers.
Great story, Joni. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Mark Fix. Mark ranches outside Miles City and has been a super leader on countless issues, including our coal bed methane and Tongue River Railroad campaigns. Mark is a former chair of Northern Plains and puts a great deal of time, energy, and expertise into our ongoing coal work. Take it away, Mark.
Okay. We bought our ranch in 1991. When we bought the ranch, the realtor told us that the Tongue River Railroad was proposed to the ranch. He did not think that it would ever happen. Shortly after we bought the ranch, landmen started making visits. My mother and father-in-law told us that there was an organization called Northern Plains Resource Council, and they had a barbecue near Bernie. We went to the barbecue and met Aldersons and Wally McRae and many other folks that were active with Northern Plains. We became members and then started to find out more about the Tongue River Railroad. We felt that we could say no at first and then realized that Tongue River Railroad had the right to condemn our property with eminent domain. Northern Plains let us know that we needed to work with these folks and stall to get more information. If we just told them no, they could start proceedings to condemn the property. We talked with neighbors to see what they were told as well. Northern Plains helped us get comments together to work on a new proposal for the railroad. We became aware of what problems we would face with the railroad going across 3 miles of our ranch. It would make a wall that the cattle could not cross and sever the river from them. We would have to cross a track through culverts to get to the other side. We may not be able to get through the culvert with our farming and haying machinery, so we may have to go several miles to a grade crossing to get our machinery across. The cattle were supposed to learn how to go through the culverts. We knew that some of our cattle would never learn how to go through the culverts. Trains would start fires and blow their horns at crossings, which would disturb the peace and tranquility of the ranches along the tongue. My neighbor at the time was Bill Bulwer. I talked with him and we came up with a new route to go across our places. It would take the railroad a little further away from the river and solve some of our problems. We had the landmen come and look at our suggestions. The landmen were visiting almost all of us at the time. After we had shown them our plans, I noticed a pickup had come and crossed our bridge across the Tongue River. I did not know what they were doing, and they had not contacted me. I could not figure out why they were trespassing. I called Jeff Barber, who was an organizer with Northern Plains at the time, and asked for advice. I looked for a locking device I had for my motorcycle, was going to lock my gate on the bridge. Noticed they were coming back from across the river, so I tossed a locking device on the ground and headed over to meet them. Stopped the pickup on the other side of the bridge. The landman that had been on my place earlier was driving the pickup. His name was George Luther. I informed him that he was trespassing, and then I noticed that my neighbor was in the pickup with him. My neighbor had the right to go across my bridge to get to his property. I told George that my neighbor had the right to go over there, but he did not. He was apologetic and said that he just realized that he was trespassing. Shortly after that, I sent Tongue River Railroad a letter saying that they were trespassing and that the bridge would be locked. I informed the neighbor he was not happy about my decision, but I told him where I hid a key so he could cross. We continued to work with the Tongue River Railroad, but could not come to an agreement on the new route. Bill Bulwer told them to make an offer for the right-of-way. They came back with an offer of about $100 an acre. It only crossed a few acres, so the total would be a very small amount. He never accepted the offer. They never really pushed too hard because the owner was a guy named Mike Gustafson that was from the Billings area. He never really had the wherewithal to build the railroad. We knew that Burlington Northern was the backer of the railroad and was where the real threat was. Time went on, more of my neighbors ended up selling their places and were replaced with new folks who were not aware of the problems they had inherited. Many were upset with the plans, but did not want to confront the railroad wanted to get along with everyone. Several of the businesses in Miles City were for the railroad, so that made it difficult to continue to do business with them. I decided one day to make a petition and have it signed by the folks along the river that were crossed by the railroad. I grabbed my petition and started up the river to gather signatures. I managed to catch many of the landowners, and they gladly signed. Some did not own the land and could not own, but were sympathetic to my cause. I continued up the river and kept gathering signatures. I didn't get to the burning area until close to dark. I stayed overnight with Nan Carroll, and she helped me get to the burning neighbors. I decided to stop at a place that we knew was not owned by the person on the place, but I wanted to talk to them anyway. We sat down at his table and he asked if I had seen a map that he showed me. I had not seen it. It was a bound book of 11 by 17 map pages of the entire Tongue River Railroad route from Miles City to the Tongue River Dam. He said he had gone out to get his mail and the map was just laying on the ground. I told him to hold on to the map because we'd never seen a map that showed the entire route. The map was left there by folks that were working on the Tongue River Railroad. I talked with Art Hayes the next day and asked if he could see if he could borrow the map to run copies. They let us borrow it and we ran several copies. You just never know when or where you can find a helping hand. The Montco mine was the original reason for building the Tongue River Railroad, and they lost their permit shortly after we bought the ranch. Then the Tongue River Railroad route was changed to go all the way through to the Tongue River Dam and meet with the railroad that goes from Decker Mine to Sheridan. The route was now a shortcut for Wyoming coal to the northeast markets. Coal had to go to Billings and come back down Yellowstone at that time. They also had the idea that they would build the mine up Otter Creek and they would have a spur that went up to that mine. Started pushing harder on that route and developing the Otter Creek mine. As time went on, neighbors started changing on the burning end of the route as well. A guy by the name of Forrest Mars of Mars Candy bought out several of the ranches between Bernie and the Tongue River Dam. Mars realized that he had no more power against eminent domain than the poorest dirt farmer on the river. He was friends with the head of Burlington Northern, Warren Buffett. As time went on, Arch Cole started working on trying to get a mine at Otter Creek, and Arch, BN, and an undisclosed entity bought out the third interest from Mike Gustafson. We always knew that there was a driving force behind Mike Gustafson, and he was just a figurehead. Then we found out that Forrest Mars was the undisclosed entity that bought out the Tongue River Railroad route on the southern end where it crossed his property. Shortly after that, Arch declared bankruptcy. We started challenging the Tongue River Railroad through the Surface Transportation Board in Washington, D.C. with our awesome attorney, Jack Tuholsky. We pointed out the railroad was no longer needed as Arch was bankrupt, and there was no reason for the railroad anymore. The Surface Transportation Board finally agreed with us and dropped the permit, but did not stop them from reapplying someday in the future. Finally, after many years, we had the cloud of the Tongue River Railroad removed from our heads. We hope it never comes back again.
Wow, thank you, Mark. You told a 37-year story in 5 minutes. That's very impressive. And I meant to say that Mark is actually originally from Ekalaka, Montana, and then eventually ended up in Miles City. And that Mike Gustafson is the Darth Vader of the Tongue River Railroad. And honestly, Mike Gustafson did Northern Plains a huge favor because he brought Mark Fix to us when Mark responded to this terrible project. So thank you, Mark. Like our first storyteller, Ellen, this last speaker was also around from the very beginning of Northern Plains, but in a different role. Pat Sweeney was the first staff director of Northern Plains and has been a driving force in coordinating, building, and amplifying the conservation in Montana ever since. Pat created and led the Western Organization of Resource Councils and has been instrumental in serving our other organizations across the state. Pat, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Teresa. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the invite. It's so hard to believe tonight that we're celebrating 50 years of annual meetings of the Northern Plains Resource Council. Quite a milestone for any organization, let alone a grassroots citizen organization that really has helped shape the future of this state. Tonight, I want to tell you about a band of strong ranchers and farmers who organized to protect their land. In 1976, the Bureau of Land Management embarked on a program to accelerate coal strip mining by initiating a public nomination process for land for strip mining, and then decided to keep the names of who nominated that land secret. You can imagine the thousands of acres of eastern Montana that got nominated. Most of Northern Plains landowners had their farms and ranches nominated, but they couldn't find out who nominated their land for coal. The BLM refused to release the list. At the time, our Circle Montana affiliate, MAPO, the Macomb Agriculture Protection Organization, emerged around the proposed massive strip mining and coal gasification project in the Fort Union Formation, backed by the Burlington Northern Railroad, the Circle West project. All their farms were nominated to be mined. MAPO and Northern Plains began a campaign demanding the release of the names of who nominated their land for strip mining. Dave Albersworth, our then Glendive and MAPO organizers, created maps and posters that were plastered on many of the telephone pole in Macomb County, showing an X on each section nominated. The poster read, "Is your section marked on this map? Then someone is planning to strip mine your land." That built a stream of what we called a smoking good action. MAPO members, along with local press from Miles City and Glendive, and yes, we actually had local reporters and local press at one time, decided to pay an unannounced visit to the Miles City BLM office and meet with the district manager, George Newberry. MAPO members entered the BLM office and asked to see George. It was all peaceful, no George Bundy type BS. Our members knew and worked with these BLM staff, but they were firm in their demand to know who nominated their sections for strip mining. One by one, they stepped up, showed their maps and the sections that were marked, and asked George who nominated their land. At one point in the meeting, George was feeling the heat. He had one cigarette smoking in the ashtray on his desk and one lit and smoking in his hand. Our members filed out, having sent the message. The ask was clearly getting home. Release the names. Within months of the smoking good action, as we used to call it, and the press that was generated from the meeting, the newly elected Carter administration capitulated from embarrassment and released the names of those who nominated. No one was surprised that the Burlington Northern was the major nominator, the very Burlington Northern behind the Circle West project. The nominations program turned out to be a flop. The Circle West project turned out to be a flop. The Northern Plains ranchers and farmers turned out to be the heroes. Thank you, Charlie Yarger, Lyle Quick, Helen and Gordy Waller, Tom Brightbaugh, Harvey Beaver, Jerry Eisinger, and the many other Northern Plains and MAPO members who worked so hard to shape the future of Montana. You know, after some reflection and ruminating on Northern Plains stories, I decided to keep one more short story, add on to this one. And that's a story about the first annual meeting of Northern Plains in 1972, or at least the meeting that we dubbed the first annual meeting of the Northern Plains Resource Council. Ellen alluded to this already in her statement about the October meeting in 1972. As I say, two of us on this panel tonight, Ellen Pfister and I, were at that very first meeting. And I might say almost everyone since. The meeting was called because the first chair of Northern Plains, Dick Colbert, had resigned. Dick, related to the Reddings of Sarpy Creek, had stepped in as chair when Northern Plains was started in April of 1972. Now he was running for the legislature on controlling strip mining, as Ellen had said. He eventually won that 1972 race and was part of the historic work Northern Plains did to pass model reclamation legislation. But that night, a group of Northern Plains members convened a meeting at the home of Kit Muller in Billings, Montana. Kit, along with a handful of recent college graduates and ranch kids, formed the core of our first staff. We often met at the Muller home just off of Virginia Lane. That night, there was a crowd of 20 or more ranchers and supporters meeting to plot the next moves to stop the vision developed by the North Central Power Study of a national sacrifice zone and to further develop the fledgling Northern Plains Resource Council. When the question of a new chair was to succeed Dick came up, I remember Bob Tully, the Bull Mountain rancher and one of the founders of Northern Plains, standing up next to the big fireplace in the home and nominating Ellen Pfister. Ellen had recently returned to Montana and the family ranch in the Bull Mountains, having graduated from law school and private practice. Bob said, "Here is a person who has been researching the mining laws, has a law degree, and knows ranching and our concerns because she is a rancher." Ellen, I remember, was a bit taken aback by the nomination. There were no other nominations that night, and Ellen was elected unanimously, and she stepped up to leadership that first, what we called annual meeting 50 years ago. We also created a Northern Plains Bylaws Committee chaired by Republican State Senator George Darrow, a Billings geologist and an early Northern Plains supporter. I was asked to serve on that committee. And oh my God, I can't believe that that night started a 50-year career of dealing with bylaws and organizational development and capacity, to say nothing of partnering with Ellen and the Northern Plains rancher members to work on strip mine reclamation. Sound like a typical annual meeting? As I reflect on that night 50 years later, I realize how Ellen's election set the stage for the future. A talented, often reluctant member who was asked to step up, again, often out of their comfort zone, to provide leadership. Thank you, Ellen. And thank you, Jeannie Alderson, and now Joni Kresich, for stepping up. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Pat. We've actually had a couple of requests for you to do another story. I hate to spring this on you since, you know, you're my spouse and they'll be held to pay for this, but would you be able to tell the story of Robert Redford and Boyd Charter and the governor of Montana?
Oh, I can tell it because I was there. This would have been Coal Strip, probably 76 or 70, about 76. Robert Redford had just released All the President's Men, and he gave that to the conservation community around the country as a premiere movie, and he would come and show that movie and as a fundraiser. And Northern Plains Resource Council, there was, I think, 10 or 12 groups around the country chosen to be to show the premiere, and we were one of them. Northern Plains was one of them. So Redford was going to show up. Unfortunately, I forget, there was some mix-up with the filming, so we ended up showing Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and some remakes of that. But Robert Redford showed up and did actually a press release on Coal Strip 3 and 4 at the time. But we had a pre-party at Bill Despard's home, a cocktail party to raise funds, and Redford appeared at this cocktail party. But during this whole process, the then governor of Montana, Tom Judge, we had a long campaign to get the governor to come out against Coal Strip 3 and 4. And just before this cocktail party, he announced his support for Coal Strip 3 and 4, which you can imagine really disappointed everybody at Northern Plains. But he had the gall to fly into Billings with his wife and one of his handlers and show up at Bill Despard's house so he could get his picture taken with Robert Redford at our cocktail party. Well, you can imagine the angst that we all had, especially the organizers, about the governor of Montana showing up just after he'd announced pro Coal Strip. So at one point, we just told Redford, don't ever connect with the governor, don't get your picture taken with him. So Redford moved around the party in opposite directions from the governor. But then at one point, Boyd Charter came up to Governor Judge while he was standing there with his wife and handlers, and I was standing right next to him. And Boyd Charter looked at the governor and said he was really disappointed with him. And he put his arm around Boyd put his arm around Tom Judge, the governor of Montana. And he said to the governor, "Governor Judge, I just want to be able to tell my grandchildren that I put my arm around the biggest chicken shit son of a bitch in the state of Montana." And I couldn't believe it, but Boyd spoke truth to power that night by telling the governor what he thought. And I can tell you within minutes, Tom Judge turned hightail and left the cocktail party, never getting his picture taken with Robert Redford.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you for doing that off the cuff too. That's such a good story and inspiring, and one we all hope we get to experience ourselves. Okay, I think we need to wrap it up here pretty soon. Everybody stayed so well under time and on time. That's great. We want to move on to the staff skit, which always is a do not miss kind of experience. I really loved hearing these stories, and I continue to be inspired by all of the great work we do together. But before we move on to entertainment, I want to let everyone know of all the great work that our members are doing with our history project. So this whole, many things that you have seen over the last year or so from the regarding the Northern Plains history has been generated by a committee, of course, of Northern Plains members. And I want to thank Tom Tully, Paul and Ellie Hawks, Jeannie Alderson, the late Eileen Morris, Ed Gulick, Pat Sweeney, Margie McDonald, John Smiley, and Steve Paulson. And if I've left someone out, I'm very sorry. We had some people come and go in the committee, but I said Tom.
Oh, good.
Yeah, Tom Tully first. Yes, he's our chair. I can't leave Tom out. So the committee's been working very hard. And one of the things that we're very proud of is we have a photo display here in the office, and we also now have it online. So you at your leisure can look at the photo display with captions. And we had to comb through something like 50,000 photographs to select a few. And our only disappointment was there's so many other people but we had to at some point stop. They had to stop me. But I really encourage you to take a few minutes and look at that. And I think Dustin is going to flash on the screen how you can get to the History Project photo display, or he was going
Actually, I'm just putting it in the chat, Teresa, just
Oh,
a link
okay.
to it.
So everybody knows to go to the chat. Unfortunately, our building is closed right now to visitors as we all deal with this ongoing pandemic. But for your convenience, you can see this online and from anywhere that you can get onto a computer. I also wanted to remind everyone of the other projects that we've done with the History Project. We created a series of videos, a 24-minute video of the origin story of Northern Plains, and it's titled Standing Together. It was accepted and screened at both the Billings International Film Festival and the Bozeman International Film Festival this summer. We've also made a series of short films, 1 9-minute film and 5 1-minute films. That all of these are available on the Northern Plains website. So we would like to show you one of them tonight, and let's watch the one about the historic fight for Billings air quality and features our late Eileen Morris.
So it wasn't until I was an adult and was consistently having respiratory problems that I began to wonder, what's causing this? And Nettie Lees was an Avon lady, and she visited all these homes in our neighborhood and recognized that when she was having respiratory problems, so were the rest of us. The air standards were guidelines. They were not standards that could be enforced. And so we took it upon ourselves then to figure out how you get standards that can be enforced.
Wow.
I'm so grateful for this work to share our history, and seeing Eileen in that video reminds me of how important it is to preserve these stories about our differing leaders from all walks of life. And I think George Carlin was the one that said, the future will soon be history. So we will now continue to gather and write up our history as it's being made all the time. Most of what you've seen and heard about today is early day history, but history is going on constantly, and it's just really important for us to recognize that. I want to also show everybody a book that we've just published. That is we call it the anthology. It's called Standing Together. It'll be, this feels like a commercial. It'll be available for sale. It's a hardbound anthology book. It's filled with, I don't know if you can see this very well, many of the photos that we didn't enlarge and hang on the walls. There's lots and lots of photos and quotes. There's poems by Wally McCrae. There's cartoons by Helen Clark. It was really fun putting this together. And my many thanks to Steve Paulson for editing it. This is quite a job to do, and we hope that everybody has an opportunity to get one of these books and to look at it. And I think Dustin is going to put in the chat how to order. Here he did the anthology. So thank you everyone for joining, for being part of Northern Plains, and back to Jeannie.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Teresa. And thank you for your amazing work on the anthology and all of the work pulling together the history project with us.